Hi, I'm Andrew Taylor. Following is part 2 of the remembrances of my mother, Betty Taylor. This portion of the video was recorded in the fall of 2008. This is a continuation of part 1 that took Betty from her birth in Gary, Indiana in 1921 to her marriage to Walt Taylor in December of 1942. In this video, Betty recollects the years from 1942 through 1955, including her marriage to Walt, Walt going into the service in World War II, Walt and Betty's first move to the Northwest, the arrival of my older sister Susan, the arrival of my older brother Tom. And then Betty also discusses her and Walt's first foray into community newspaper ownership, the sale of the newspaper, and a move back to the Midwest. Please join me and enjoy Betty's memories.
That fall, I remember I was taking a speech course, and my friend Shirley Enders, who lived right in the same area, she was going over there too, taking something, and we was in Hammond, and we had to take the streetcar over to Hammond and then come home on the streetcar at night. And you know, the class probably wasn't over till 9:30, and if we could get Walt to come over and get us, we really liked that. And he used to come over and get us, and we'd go over there twice a week, I think, that fall.
How far was the school from your house?
Well, of course, I was working downtown in Gary, which is 3 miles south of where we lived in Glen Park. And then Indiana Harbor, to get on that streetcar, was probably 5 or 6 miles. Around, maybe it was more than that, 10 miles to Indiana Harbor. And in the middle of that late at night, I'm sure you would never, women wouldn't take that ride tonight, this time of
This day and age?
Day and age, no.
So was he eager to come over? And,
oh yeah,
yeah.
He would come over,
yeah,
get us and take us home. So we.
When did he meet your parents for the first time?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
I guess maybe that first night when I had a date with him, but you know, I don't know if my father was home then or not, or I don't know. That was a long time ago.
When did you first meet his family?
His mother? Well, we went into Chicago. First we told Aunt May. We went, so this was like right after Thanksgiving that weekend. And we went in and picked Aunt May up and took her out to dinner. And we told her. She said, fine. She was all for it. She was. And she said, when are you going to tell your mother? Well, we hadn't decided, but we made a day. She was working up in Evanston, I think it was. And so we made a time, and we met her down in Chicago on State Street, and went someplace for dinner, I guess. And we told her then. And then she'd come down on the train.
Well, Aunt May said, fine, great. What did Grandma Ruth say?
Well, what could she say?
Well, I don't know. I'm asking you. I mean.
Well, I don't know. I guess she said, well, okay. But she wanted to pay for the invitations, because obviously they had to be engraved. And so she ordered the invitations, which were engraved. And then, of course, we had all of the sisters out. Clarence drove all the sisters out to meet my family.
And so those were Edith and Lillian And Ruth?
and Esther.
Esther. And Aunt May was
On the other side of the family.
She was the sister of Dad's dad.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Her married name was Walker.
Yeah. Did she ever have much interaction with Grandma Ruth?
Oh yeah, a lot. I mean, she took care of them there she was their anchor. She had the money and and everything, and she took care of it, and she Walt lived with her then when his mother got that job up in Evanston, and she lived at the hospital. And
so did she get along okay with Grandma Ruth?
oh yeah, they got along all right. They had their own. I think Ruth was a little jealous of Aunt May, but it never
developed into anything.
Yeah.
So then you got married in Gary?
Oh yeah, in the 43rd Avenue Presbyterian Church. And we got married on the weekend that gas rationing went into effect.
Mm-hmm.
And he had gotten a 5-gallon can of gas, put it in the back of that Chevrolet, and we got as far as Evanston on that. Mother had a reception at the apartment. Of course, there was nothing to drink there or anything, no champagne or anything. Punch. She had a friend who was a caterer, and then we drove to Evanston that first night. It snowed that night we were there. And I remember we got ready to check out, and Walt forgot to put his wallet in his pants. And he had this suitcase that you unzip all the way around and you laid that out flat. It was the first of those kind of suitcases. Yeah. And so in the lobby he had to open his suitcase up and get his billfold out. And we stopped in Chicago and went to a movie. I have no idea what movie it was at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And we had rented an apartment in downtown Gary. It was just a furnished, I don't know, it wasn't very large. It had a Murphy bed in it, I remember. But we were only there a month. But we were there. We had that apartment for that first month.
Mm-hmm.
Then I, of course, moved back home.
When he was inducted into the service?
Yeah, he went the first of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And I had the car.
Mm-hmm.
So that was nice.
Yeah.
I had the Chevrolet that Aunt May had given him for graduation.
So he went off to basic training in Michigan or wherever?
He went to Sparta, Wisconsin.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lady here from Sparta, and she kind of smiles when I tell her about that place. It was cold there. It was snow all over, and I went up on the train one weekend to see him while he was there. He wasn't there but a month or so, 6 weeks. And the only place we could find to be alone and hold hands or anything was in the library. We went to the library. And then there was an old hotel there, an old frame hotel. And we went over there and we rented a room. And we stayed a couple of hours. And as we walked away from the hotel, and the lady came out on the porch and she said, "Will you be back?" And we said no. Because when we were there, the ladies all had to sleep in one barracks and the men had to sleep in their own barracks. We couldn't even sleep together there.
At the hotel?
No, I mean, he couldn't be gone overnight.
I see.
So we just went in for a quickie. It's a wonder I didn't get pregnant then, but I didn't.
Mm-hmm.
I had been equipped with a diaphragm, so.
So you were prepared. So then he went back to basic training, you went back to Gary, and...
He was only there about 6 months. During that period, he got an infection in his I think it was his thumb, maybe one of his fingers, and he said he went to the dispensary on a Sunday morning, and they said, well, you must really be bad off to come on a Sunday. And I remember he said he had to sit with his finger in soaking in hot water for all that day and clear that up. But then they were right there, they culled out most of these 4Fs they had taken because they were just not Army material.
Suitable, huh?
They kept two of them. Walt was a college graduate, and the other guy was a watchmaker.
Yeah.
And they traveled all the way across the country and up to Camp Roberts in Santa Barbara, I think it is, where Camp Roberts is.
Mm-hmm.
But it was warm weather and it was nice. So by May, he was at Medford, and he called and said, well, I was at a bridge, there were a group of us whose husbands or boyfriends were gone,
Mm-hmm.
and we had gone to Phil Schmidt's, a restaurant in Hammond, for dinner, and I think we played bridge there, or maybe we didn't. Anyway, we'd gone there for dinner, and a telephone call came for me while we were there, and he said, well, I'm established now, and you can come to Medford, Oregon. Oh my, I was excited at that point. I didn't know anything about Oregon other than I'd heard of the Oregon Trail, and I knew they had lots of trees out there. But I was, Mother said they had called the house, and she had forwarded the call to me there.
Mm-hmm.
So
You
that
didn't
was-
have your cell phone with you then, huh?
No cell phone. So, in fact, you know, all that time I was in Medford and gone, I think I only called home twice.
Mhm.
Because I was afraid if I called home, they were expensive long distance calls were. I was afraid I'd get on the phone and I would cry and waste all that time, money.
So how long after you got that phone call did you get on the train and go to Medford?
Well, I don't think it was long.
So that was in May of 1943,
Yeah,
because you were married in December of 42, right?
yeah.
So you showed up in the train. So the train went from what,
Chicago.
Chicago to Portland?
North Platte, I remember we got out and walked around up there in the high country of North Platte. It's
Yeah.
it's very high there.
Yeah.
And then yes, I went to Portland. I got there in the morning, and the bus, and I went to the bus station. I guess I can't remember how I got from the train station to the bus station, but I got there.
I don't think they're very far apart in Portland, or at least they
No, well, and
weren't.
the bus station was in the same place it was until just the last few years. Because I walked around the block a couple of times there,
Yeah.
and I got on the bus there, and it took all day to get to Medford.
Oh, I'm sure. Yeah.
I think it does today
Yeah.
too.
It's even on the freeway. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you got to Medford, and
We
was he
stayed-
there waiting for you? Did you have to call him from the?
No, he was there at the bus station, and then we walked to the Hotel Medford, I think it is.
So was he wearing his uniform?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Was he a sergeant by then, or what was he?
No, he was a private.
Yeah. Private Taylor.
Yeah. And we stayed there a while, and then I found a room at some people's house it was out west of town. I think it's west of town. We found a room out there, and we stayed there. I remember while I was there, I went to there had been a murder in Medford. Some soldier was accused of murdering a girl.
Mm.
And the trial was going on downtown, and it was the talk of the town.
Big news in Medford, huh?
Oh my gosh! And I remember I went to that one day with the lady that I was for the house we
Mhm.
were staying.
Entertainment in Medford, huh?
Entertainment. But I got a job at the Post in the quartermaster department. So that then I got into carpool. There were about four women, 4 girls that this lieutenant had in his carpool.
Mm-hmm.
And then we got a different room. The room we got next was a little closer to town, and it was in a big old house. And we rented a room upstairs in this big old house. It was summer, and so the man of the house was the sheriff in an upcountry someplace, up in the mountains someplace. He was gone for the summer.
Mm-hmm.
Had the antlers on the wall and everything. And we got that room, and she had converted one room into a kitchen up there, and they'd rented out all those rooms, and you could keep your breakfast stuff there if you wanted to. And I was gone all day, and then of course we didn't have the car yet there, I don't think. But we would eat out then after he came in town. And
So how long did you live in Medford then? From May of '43 until
Susan was not quite born.
So that would have been in early '45 then. So you were there 2 years almost.
Probably a year and a half at
Yeah.
least, yeah. At one point there, we got, I don't remember when he became a sergeant. I think it was after the hospital went overseas and left him there, and he was transferred to what they call DEML, Detached Enlisted Men's Service. And that was the group that ran the camp.
Mm-hmm.
And he was the put the newspaper out,
Mm-hmm.
Camp White Grenade. But in the meantime, too, somewhere along there, we got the car. Gas rationing went off. Must have been after the Japanese, I don't know. We got the car. Aunt May, Clarence drove Aunt May and Ruth out. And then they took the train. They all took the train back.
Mm-hmm.
But we got an apartment. We got an apartment first.
Yeah, this is in
No, we got a house first.
This is in Medford or in Utah?
In Medford.
Mm-hmm.
In Medford. We got a house before we had the car. It was an old house, and it had a space heater in it. And it had a wood stove in the kitchen. I learned to cook on a wood stove. And we had to order wood. I mean, this was something new for Midwestern kids.
At your house in
kids.
Indiana, what kind of, did you have gas stove then, or electric, or what did you?
In the apartment in Gary, we had a coal furnace.
Oh, okay. Well, how about the stoves though? What did you cook on?
Oh, gas.
Gas.
Yeah. Yeah. But, so we had to order wood. We ordered wood. And Walt had to chop the wood. And we had a picture someplace around here we did about this big old shaggy dog that would come and lay there while he was chopping wood. And then we'd have to build a fire in that cook stove to cook dinner. And that would get enough hot water, because the cook stove heated the hot water for this the tank right there, and that provided the water for our bath at night. And this huge bathtub, it was 6 feet long. So we only could get enough water for one bath.
Mm-hmm.
So we had to take our baths together.
Nah.
And there was a 5-room house. And the guys, he had these friends who were also limited service, but were in the hospital group. And they would, in those days in Oregon, you couldn't buy a drink at the bar unless you had your own bottle there.
Mm-hmm.
You could take your bottle to the place.
Mm-hmm.
And you could leave your bottle there, for the soldiers would leave their bottles there, and then when they came in every weekend, they'd drink out of their bottle.
Have their name written on the label or something.
Well, they would leave their bottle at our house. And on the weekends then, these 3 guys came, and we'd have meals. We'd cook meals on our wood stove, and then they'd drink themselves into oblivion that night. And we'd go to bed and let them solve it.
So Dad wasn't a heavy drinker with the three guys?
No, not really. So we'd go to bed, and they'd sit there, and one of them had osteomyelitis in his elbow. His name was Cornwell. They called him Corny. And he was from Texas, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Another one was from North Carolina, and he had been in an automobile accident, and his jaws were wired together so that he could only open his mouth so wide, so he couldn't really chew a lot of things. And the fourth one, I don't think there was anything wrong with him. He was from Abilene, Kansas. Bob, I forgot now what his last name was. But they would come in. I remember the song, "The Dolly with the Hole in her Stocking." I don't know if you. I remember they spent one whole evening discussing about the dolly with the hole in her stocking. What kind of a person she was, and I don't know. We had those kind of conversations, but they were all well educated. They all had college educations,
Mm-hmm.
and they would have pretty good discussions about things.
So then we
were there until the hospital got ready to go overseas. There's a lady here who joined that hospital unit when it went overseas.
And where overseas did it go? Did it go to Europe or to
they
Asia?
went to New Guinea first.
Uh-huh.
And he was all ready to go, and was right up to the last minute when the guy said, "Well, go, you've got to go and get a gas mask that'll fit." They just really pushed him. So he went, and they couldn't fit him with a gas mask because his face was crooked.
Yeah.
And the small ones, the eyes would come way down here, and the others that would gap on that one side.
Mm-hmm.
So they left him behind. I remember we went down to the train station and waved goodbye to all of them. They went to New Guinea, and the one with osteomyelitis in his arm, he wasn't there long. They had to send him back. In fact, we found some letters that they had written, and the rest of them, when they went into Tokyo Bay,
Mm-hmm.
about the ruins and everything they saw. And so then we moved out of that old house and got a better apartment down in town. And we had the car by then. I'm sure we did, yeah. And then he was transferred then to this office, and got into putting the paper out.
Mm-hmm.
And I was working for the quartermaster out in a warehouse. Each warehouse had a little office up in the corner of it. And they'd need things moved from here to there, and so they'd give me a detail of men to show them where they were supposed to go, and when they brought German prisoners of war to Camp White.
Mm-hmm.
They were all still in there. They were from Africa, had been in Africa, and they were all in shorts. And I remember that I'd be up on the dock along the warehouse, and they said I was too skinny. I needed to be plumper.
The Germans said that?
The Germans, yeah.
How many were there? Were there a lot of them?
Oh, I think there were quite a few. I don't know how many there were. They had some Italian ones there too.
Mm-hmm. So they had a stockade there at Camp White that they imprisoned the enemy combatants in, and
then they'd have them come out and do some labor around the camp. You know?
Was there any concern about the prisoners escaping?
Well, they were supposed to pull. They had
Guards.
duty in the I think Walt said something about he was supposed to be on duty. I can't, and he had never even, couldn't even shoot the gun, or he didn't, I don't know, something about that. I'd forgotten that story, but
Mhm.
but yeah, they had guards
Mhm.
in the and a couple of them got out once, and they were gonna walk back to Germany.
Yeah. Well,
They
it's taken a while.
started east, but they didn't get very far in Medford.
I guess. So then at some point you got transferred to Brigham City, Utah, or wherever.
Yes, the commanding officer at its DEML office was Mansur Tinsley, and he had been a polio victim.
Mm-hmm.
So he had a limp, and he'd gone to the University of Missouri.
Mm-hmm.
And so when he got to Brigham City, Utah, he requested that Walt be sent there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when we left there. Susan was about 9 months old.
I thought she was born in Utah.
Yeah, she was. I was pregnant, yeah. No, she was 9 months old when we left Utah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was pregnant by that time.
Mm-hmm.
And we went to Utah, and we rented a house right in Brigham City. And then before the baby came, we didn't rent a house there, we just rented a room. And a lady whose name was Mrs. Jorgensen rented a room there. But then we decided we needed a bigger place. So I went over to Logan, which was over the mountain, and I rented this apartment. I guess we stayed I rented one very small place, and then we moved after she was born. It seems to me, I don't know, we had two places. And the one place we stayed most of the time we were there, we had been a fraternity house, and they had a big long hall upstairs, and it had all kinds of rooms up there. But the lady was a home ec teacher, Mormon, in the schools there. And so she had divided this house down the middle and downstairs, and she made herself a new apartment on one side, and then she rented out the other side.
Mm-hmm.
And we rented the other side. She said, "Oh, it'd be so nice to have a new baby in the house again." So Susan had not been born when I rented the place, and we moved there. It was after we were in there, and we knew we had to drive over the mountain
Mm-hmm.
to get to the hospital. And across the street was a two-story, a two-apartment building, a house with two apartments in it. And one of the girls was from Montana, and she was a nurse. I remember going over and told her my water had broken, and did she think I ought to go to the hospital with Walt when he went to work? And she said yes. So I went over with him when he went to work. But we were there until Susan was about 9 months old. I'd do the washing downstairs in the basement, and then when we'd hang the clothes out, the diapers outside, and I'd lay her in the grass to get a suntan with nothing on. She had a lovely suntan all over. And of course I can't remember if I had a sewing machine there, or I must have used Mrs. Brown's sewing machine. And I sewed a lot while I was there. It wasn't working, and I had a big baby buggy that Aunt May had insisted on buying when they were there. And
So at some point when you're in Utah, the war ends, is that right?
what?
The war ended while you were in Utah?
Oh yes, it did. In fact, I can remember when Walt was in the bathtub, I think, and it came over the radio, and the war had ended. And then
Was that VE Day or VJ Day?
the J Day.
Uh-huh.
Actually, when we were in Oregon, one of the girl that worked in this office where Walt was at the newspaper, she was from Medford, and she was the gas ration girl.
Mm-hmm.
And so we got lots of gas, and we went, one weekend, we went to, it was in June, we went to San Francisco.
Mm-hmm.
We drove down there, and she had a roommate that she'd had in college that was in the Waves, which was the Navy, and she had, she was stationed there, so she was living in an apartment with some other Waves, and Marion stayed with her. And that's the weekend that I got pregnant with Susie.
So you stayed with the Waves in the room, or you?
No,
rented
we stayed in the St. Francis Hotel.
Mm-hmm.
So Susie was conceived in the St. Francis Hotel in San
Mhm.
Francisco on VD Day.
VD? You mean VE Day?
VD Day.
You mean D Day?
D Day.
Not VD Day.
On D Day, yeah. Those things are all beginning to get because, gee, that was like 64 years ago.
Yeah. Oh, I know it was a long time ago. I mean, you're recalling this stuff, in amazing.
And we
clarity.
went out with that one night we were there. We went out with,
This was in San Francisco.
yeah, we went out with the Waves, and there was a couple of men with the soldiers with us too. And we had to go through a roadblock. And of course we'd been drinking, but we got through this roadblock.
What was the roadblock looking for? Enemy?
Oh, drunk drivers.
Oh.
And the Wave worked in one of the offices where messages came in from overseas, and they had gotten a message that day. Pretty Wave, I don't know, the forces have landed someplace. As I say, I'm beginning to get,
Yeah.
and I don't have my prompter here.
Yeah. Well, that's why I'm recording this now, so that we can all share in your memories here.
Yeah, but that was fun being with her and the rest of the Waves, and
Uh-huh.
we had all that. We had that gas to go down there, but then back to Utah.
So with the gas ration coupon, you'd pull into a gas station, show them the coupon, and that would give you the chance to buy gas
Yeah,
in the
You had
amount
to
that the
turn-
coupon.
you had to turn some coupons in or something.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, we all had food rationing too. I mean, we had those little things. Some were for meat and some were for sugar.
Mm-hmm.
And when you got a new baby, well, you got a whole another group of coupons that you could
Yeah.
use.
So then Susan was born, and then the war ended.
Yeah, and I remember I was feeding her when the news came over that Roosevelt had died.
That was what, 6 months before the war ended, then, or 5 months before the
Yeah.
war ended. Yeah.
Remember that.
So the war ended, and then how much longer did Dad have to stay in the service until?
A while, because he had to process the papers.
Uh-huh.
And we went back and we drove that Chevrolet back over our worldly but
This is after he's been discharged from the service? You drove back?
Yeah.
And when would that have been? Would that have been in the winter?
Well, it must have been in this, let's see, she was born in what? It must have been in the fall,
Uh-huh.
late fall.
Because the war ended like in August, so that's...
Yeah, so it must have been late fall.
Uh-huh.
And she was, so we spread a GI comforter over the top of that because it was a two-door car.
Mm-hmm.
And then she crawled around all on the top of that.
Well, she mustn't have crawled that much. She was only 9 months old, or 6 months old.
But she was crawling.
Yeah.
And
Didn't have her in a car seat, huh? A baby
no
seat.
way. And actually, while we were in Utah, and we got the car, had the car, and that's when the gas rationing went off. And so we decided to take a trip and go to, it wasn't all that far, I don't know how far it is from Logan to Jackson Hole.
Mm-hmm.
But we went to Jackson Hole one weekend. And that's where we left Susan in the closet while we went down to eat.
Yeah. Abandonment of your
And
child.
came back, and we were going to stay another night someplace, and it was raining, storming so hard, and the lightning and everything, and we just drove straight home. And so it was that the next day, and Walt said, well, we didn't get to stay overnight. Why don't you go down and buy one of those bracelets you've been wanting? And that's when I bought this bracelet.
Oh my gosh.
And I've been wearing it ever since.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been wearing it for, she's 63, I've been wearing it about 62 years.
Oh my gosh. So then you get back to Gary. Is that where you went back to?
We did. We went back to Gary, to my mother's and dad's.
And then he found another job
I know, he went back, you got your job back.
at the Post-Tribune in
Oh,
Gary.
yeah, they had to hold the jobs
Mhm.
in for you when you came in. And he got the job back, and that's when he worked in Gary for a while, not long, and then they gave him the post in Crown Point as the political reporter
Mhm.
down there.
Mm-hmm.
And so then Daddy was selling real estate, and so then he found this house for us in Gary
To buy or to rent?
to buy.
Uh-huh.
Because Aunt May helped us buy the house, I'm sure, as I remember. We didn't have any money. And the house was $7,000.
Mm-hmm.
The guy, it was a brick house, that square brick house.
Mm-hmm.
And he had only paid $7,000 for it, but he lived it in a year, and he thought it was a used house,
Mm.
so he sold it to us for $7,000. He'd been living there with his crippled mother,
Mm-hmm.
and so Clarence had packed up all the stuff in the apartment that Aunt May was living in, one of her apartments, but she'd taken Ruth's furniture, and the furniture that we wanted, they packed up and moved to Gary for us.
Mm-hmm.
That was what we started out with.
Mm-hmm. So then you lived in Crown Point for...
Not well until a month after Tom was born. So
Okay.
we lived there a couple of years, I guess.
So it'd be
And
September of 47.
yeah. And then we moved to Crown Point because he was traveling back and forth to Crown Point.
Mm-hmm. So you moved to Crown Point then in September of 47? And then how long did you live in Crown Point?
Till 52 or so when we went to California.
So Tom went into the kindergarten in...
Tom was a month old when we moved down there, and he was 4 when we left.
Oh, okay.
So there you go.
Okay.
And he was going to, we didn't call it daycare or anything like that then. We called it nursery school.
Uh-huh.
And I still have those 2 little puzzles, wooden puzzles.
Mm-hmm.
I still have those in a drawer in there. It was run by 2 sisters, and their father made the puzzles for the kids then. And everybody, there was anybody who sent their kids to this little nursery school.
In California, in San Bruno?
Crown Point.
Oh, in Crown Point.
And we enjoyed living there. And we could walk to everything.
Mm-hmm.
And Walt would go to work in the morning there, and then about 1 or 2 in the afternoon, he drove to Gary. Now, today, you just sit down and on a computer and send your story back. But he would drive to Gary and do his story, write his stories there.
Mm-hmm.
And and when we were still living in Gary, he used to go to, after work on Fridays, they'd go down to have a beer before they came home. And I was getting stir crazy with just a baby at home, you know, this no adults to talk to. And so Mother said, well, bring Susan down and leave her with me and you can go downtown and then go with Walt after on Friday night. So I would do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then after we moved to Crown Point, Nancy got a job down at the Gary paper.
Mm-hmm.
She was selling advertising, and so she went down to have beer with him, and then he'd bring her home.
Mm-hmm.
And Mother and Dad at that time were living in an apartment that they had rented because they sold the building and they were building their new house.
Mm-hmm.
And Nancy used to give him all these. She was dating an attorney who was Catholic, and of course Mother and Father were very
Concerned about
concerned about that. Mother left all the Masonic information out on the coffee table and all.
that. Huh? What, when the guy came over to try to
Yeah, and
give him some kind of a hint?
right, and this attorney really didn't have a very good reputation either, and so Walt said, "Well, we've just got to get Nancy a date with somebody else. Your folks are going mad thinking she's getting too serious with this attorney," and he didn't think of much of him either. So he had met Skip at the dentist's office, and he asked me about him, and so I said, "Well, yeah, his parents go to the Presbyterian church, and I knew his brother, and said he'd probably work." So
He'd probably work.
and because all he'd been doing was, he hadn't been back very long from the service, I guess, or I don't know. He didn't have anybody he was going with. He'd been babysitting for his older brother's kids.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we got him a date with Nancy, and they decided, that was that Halloween dance. And they decided to get married. No, that was another Halloween dance. That was another Halloween dance. Anyway, they decided.
Anyway, you guys hooked them up then.
Right.
Yeah, great.
Walt never let Nancy forget that, as you might imagine. Of course, they had a gentleman farm out there in Crown Point, and the farm had a pool and a barn and horses, and Nancy decided this was a good catch.
So then in 52, you, May died in 51, or?
Yeah, she died, and we got all that estate settled, and sold the apartment, and got that all straightened out. I think I still have the papers in there on the real estate sale of that apartment.
Mm-hmm. So you got the settlement, and you looked for a paper to buy somewhere.
We looked for a paper to buy.
Any place in particular? Were you looking in California, or were you?
We were looking actually in the Northwest, but there was nothing up here. I remember we did call up to Everett, because there was a guy named Bob Best, that owned the paper in Everett.
Mm-hmm.
And he was somehow related to somebody we knew in Crown Point.
Mm-hmm.
And so one time we were at a party, and she called her relative out there to ask if he knew of any papers out here that were for sale. Well, he couldn't think of any. So then Walt got on the train, or I guess he came out here on the train. Well, we looked at several papers. He came out on the train and looked up and down the coast. Of course, he went to Santa Monica, where his mother was.
Mm-hmm.
And he looked at papers down there, but he didn't go for any of those. And then he got information on a paper at Lakewood, where it's just up above San Francisco, up above Marin County. And we came, and I guess I came out here, or I was out here, or I came out, and somehow we took Aunt May and Aunt Lillian, or Aunt Edith, with us up there to look at that paper, which is where Barbara Schwannis was from.
No.
And It would have been a good paper. The woman kept the shop so clean she could go out there in her white dress and sit down at the linotype. And it would have been a good paper, but with those two women with us and everything, we turned that down and took the one in San Bruno.
How much did you end up paying for the paper in San Bruno? Do you remember?
I don't remember. I just don't remember.
I mean, was it under $100,000?
Well, we put too much down to begin with, and then we ran out of working capital.
Mm-hmm.
We learned that lesson.
Yeah.
It was quite a place to learn to get one's basic training
Mm-hmm.
in business
Mm-hmm.
and unions, because San Mateo County was it's a union town, and they were trying to take advantage of us. And then we went to that teletypesetter, and I was setting the type. But I mean, before we put that in, it was all a hush-hush thing. And we had sabotage in the back shop, and we had a black typesetter on the linotype, and he accidentally scattered the type all over the floor. That was one thing he did, you know. It was all kind of a hush-hush thing.
Mm-hmm.
And the union finally made a ruling that if the publisher's wife would run the machine,
Yeah.
and she could join the union, and that's when I had to join the ITU.
Mm-hmm.
I went to a couple of meetings, and then I didn't go to any more. I just paid the dues.
And that was only a weekly paper, right? The San Bruno Herald?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, they wanted to get their foot in the door.
So San Bruno didn't last very long, huh?
Well, let's see, we went there in about 52 or 3,
Mm-hmm.
and then we sold the paper, and I thought I wanted to go back to the Middle West.
How much did you sell the paper for? Do you remember that?
I don't even remember that, but I know we had a contract.
Mm-hmm.
We sold it to some guy from Ludington, Michigan. His name was Cloud.
Mm-hmm.
And after we were all through with everything, and then he came back and he said we had misrepresented the circulation figures.
Hmm.
Well, that was... And when we sold that paper, Walt was devastated. He felt like he had run the race and then had failed. He'd fallen off the cliff.
Mm-hmm.
And we had to then renegotiate that sale, give back some money and everything, and I'd pack Susan's and Tom's lunch and send them off to school and pack a lunch for us, and we'd go over and sit on the beach and watch the waves.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember thinking, I can see why people jump off the Bay Bridge.
But you'd already sold the paper at this time,
We had
right?
sold the paper, yeah, and we
Mhm.
were gonna go back to the Middle West.
Mm-hmm.
But Walt said, well, we're gonna leave the furniture in storage in Burlingame. We'll leave it here till we decide what we're doing. So we took off and went to, we took off before school was out, and the superintendent of schools gave us a bunch of old books so that we could have class
Mm-hmm.
on the way. And we took that trip across country, which I enjoyed particularly, and I guess Walt did too, finally. And so we had all these dates we set up around to look at papers.
Mm-hmm.
And
With the thought of buying another one?
yeah, the contract we had gotten was a little bit to begin with, but then the next payment didn't come due until June or something.
Mhm.
It was sort of spread out then over. They would start coming in monthly after that. And
So when you bought the San Bruno Herald, you'd paid cash, so you didn't owe anything on it?
we owed something on it, I think. I don't, and no, we must have paid cash for it, and then we didn't have any working capital.
Right.
And so then when we sold it, we had to sell it and take payments back.
Mm-hmm.
And we went back to Indiana, of course. And then he interviewed in Oxford, Ohio. And he interviewed we went up to Cleveland, someplace up there in Cleveland. Remember the old Timken furnace factory that's up there? Would you like to stop this for a minute again?
Sure.